Hi there, everyone. I see we're 2 minutes past the hour, so let's get started. Thank you so much for joining us today for this webinar. This webinar is focused on teacher wellbeing in crisis contexts and is an opportunity for us to share good practice, lessons learned, and opportunities for change within the sector. I'd like to thank many partners who are involved in this event and an event series that this is part of. And as you can see on the slide here, this event is co-organised by the LEGO Foundation, the UNESCO Teacher Task Force, Education International, Oxfam, as well as INEE, and particularly INE's Teachers in Crisis context. So thank you to all of the members here today. As I mentioned, this is part of an event series really trying to elevate and advocate for the needs of teachers working in crisis contexts. And we'll share more details about the wider event series with you in the chat. But today's event is really about sharing lessons learned in this learning piece of the series, and is the first of several events focused on that learning piece. So we look forward to sharing more with you on that. Before we get started though, I did just want to share some webinar housekeeping with you. So you'll notice that your audio and video aren't working. Only the panelists and presenters and speakers have audio and video. So don't worry if you make a noise, that's not a problem. Also, just to let you know that we do want to hear from you, even though your audio isn't working. So please do put any questions you have in the Q&A, and we'll respond to those. Either we'll write responses or we'll respond in the discussion. So please share those at any time. You can also speak to us via the chat function as well. Just a reminder that this session is being recorded, and we'll share the recording and the presentations with you after the event and on the INEE website. And lastly, just to say, closed captioning is available in English, and you can find that at the bottom of your screen. But we've got a lot to discuss today. I know this is an issue that's close to many of our hearts, and we want to do more and better for teachers in the sector. So I'm going to hand over to our moderator for today, Charlotte Berquin, one of our wonderful colleagues on the Teachers in Crisis Contexts Collaborative. And Charlotte's with the UNHCR Bureau in Western Central Africa, and an amazing advocate for teachers. So thanks for being with us, Charlotte. Over to you.
Thanks, Charlotte. Thanks a lot. Hi, everyone. So I'm very happy to welcome you to this webinar today, which promises to be an exciting exchange on teacher well-being in crisis context, a thematic which is one of the most crucial and pressing issues for all education actors working in emergency or conflict settings. As Charlotte just said, this webinar is the first in a series aimed at contributing to a growing evidence base on how to improve ways to support teachers by prioritizing their well-being. As we all know, teacher well-being is key to providing quality, equitable education and improving the classroom climate for all students, so children and youth are better able to learn, especially in crisis context. Today, we will hear from teachers and education actors in emergency working in Kenya, Lebanon, El Salvador, and Sierra Leone, who will share their reflections on the challenges, lessons learned, and opportunities to support and improve teacher well-being in crisis context. Before to get started, I will quickly take you through the agenda and introduce our brilliant speakers for today. So Daniel Falk from the Columbia University Teachers College will set the scene for us by presenting the latest INEE research on teacher well-being. You will then hear from Aguero Mayen, a refugee teacher and teacher trainer in Kakuma refugee camp in Kenya. And you will then hear from Suha Tutunji, Fernanda Suarez, and Lindsay Brown, who will present their case studies, followed by a discussion moderated by Chris Henderson, who co-leads the INEE Teacher in Crisis Context Collaborative. Finally, Samaya Mansour from Teachers College will conclude by sharing the findings of the Teacher Wellbeing Tools and Resource Mapping recently published by the INEE. Without further ado, I wish you a very good webinar, and I hand over to Dani. Dani, over to you.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. And Charlotte. As Charlotte just mentioned, I'm going to set the stage in how we think about teacher well-being, and I'll repeat some of the really sort of foundational ideas that Charlotte just shared in opening up the webinar. We know that teachers play a central role in delivering quality education, with research demonstrating that teachers are the most important school-level factor for student learning, and more recently pointing to the relationship between teachers' own well-being and their students' social, emotional, and cognitive development. But we also know that teaching is one of the most stressful professions, and this takes on new meaning in crisis settings where the stress of teaching is compounded by the stress of living in unstable and insecure environments, and where support to teachers is sporadic, insufficient, and of varied quality. The COVID-19 pandemic has only further amplified the indispensable role of teachers and compounded the risks they face in carrying out their work. And all of this has important implications for teachers and their well-being. So in 2019, the Education Equity Research Initiative, which is co-led by Save the Children and FHI 360, endeavored to better understand teacher well-being in crisis-affected settings. As part of this work, my colleague Emily Varney, now at Save the Children, and I, along with invaluable guidance from Paul Frazzoli at the Lego Foundation and Julia Finder-Jonah at Save the Children, developed a teacher well-being conceptual framework, as you can see on this slide, that outlines the individual and contextual factors that influence teacher well-being in low-resource, crisis, and conflict-affected contexts. This conceptual framework and the broader report can be found in the chat box that Charlotte just shared the link. This framework was informed by the INEE minimum standards and is also operationalized in a key actions matrix, which provides targeted recommendations for practitioners and policymakers to prioritize and support teacher well-being in their work. As the visual represents, and as we'll hear from Aguero and the future panelists, we have to understand teacher well-being from a socio-ecological approach. And what I mean by this is that factors outside of the classroom and school can influence teacher well-being, such as relationships with the community, teachers' own safety and security, and policies around teacher compensation and professional development, to name a few. Meaningful, holistic, and responsive support for teachers requires broader thinking about teacher well-being, and this thinking needs to take into consideration the context in which teachers live and work, as well as their profiles and backgrounds. As you can see on the conceptual framework, there are 4 levels of support for teacher well-being that we feel are essential: the individual, school, community, and national, regional, and global levels, which speak more to the policy space. And across these levels, there are 16 factors that influence teacher well-being. Factors such as teacher-student relationships at the school level, or access to basic needs at the community level, or right to work at the policy level, all can influence teacher well-being in both positive and negative ways based on the context in which teachers live and work. Finally, in the upper left corner of the conceptual framework, you can see 4 constructs which help us better understand what makes up teacher well-being: teacher self-efficacy, job stress and burnout, job satisfaction, and social emotional competence. Overall, supporting teacher well-being requires recognizing and investing in their strengths and responding to school-based and system-level challenges through contextualized and sustainable interventions. Before we hear from our panelists who are doing this work, reflect on all of their efforts to support teacher well-being in various crisis-affected contexts, we're going to hear from Aguero, a refugee teacher and teacher trainer working in Kakuma Refugee Camp and Kalabeye Settlement in Northwest Kenya, which is home to approximately 200,000 refugees from over 18 countries. Aguero has been a teacher for 6 years and a teacher trainer for the last 3 years. And we've asked him to share his reflections on how his work influences his well-being. So I'll turn it over to this recording of Aguero that we can all take time to listen to now.
Now, here I'm going to talk about how my work has influenced my well-being. My work has influenced my well-being stressfully. This is due to so many reasons, and one of them is overcrowded classrooms. In my context, the ratio of teacher to learners in any given class is 1:70. This means that in my class, I have 181 learners, and this is less compared to other classrooms. Sometimes attending to the needs of all these learners is stressful since I cannot move easily to various parts of the class. Lack of motivation is another stressful influence despite the kind of work teachers do under this harsh condition. We do not feel appreciated for the work we do. This means that most employers put more attention on what you have done wrong than what you do right. Too much workload is also another issue. In my case, I handle 4 subjects in grades 8 and 7, some of which are taught 7 and 5 times respectively in a week. And in addition to it, I am a protection focal person and at the same time a senior teacher. And being a senior teacher in this context comes with a lot of responsibilities too, such as collecting daily attendance. This is because of the school meals, keeping school books and issuing them to teachers on a daily basis, admitting new learners, writing weekly and monthly reports. And in this context too, we do not have enough materials for learning, and therefore it is up to you as the teacher to make sure your lesson is understood by your students. This means that I have to gather my resources in advance before my lesson. Also, handling conflicts within learners is also stressful. They come from different backgrounds, and so they have many differences, and this causes stress. In addition, inadequate compensation is also another factor. The kind of work we do in this kind of environment is not equivalent with the compensation we receive. This causes stress at work, and it has resulted to many teachers quitting jobs in large numbers. The other stressful thing in my work is that is affecting my well-being is lack of training for teachers. Most teachers are not qualified or underqualified in this region, but they are not being trained as well. Some people like myself are professionals in teaching, but because there are no opportunities for furthering it, and it is the most essential sector for transforming the world into a better place. The change of curriculum in this country has also made teaching so difficult because I have not been trained on this upcoming curriculum, and it is also stressful.
Okay, so now we're going to be looking at some case studies, and if I can briefly introduce myself, my name is Chris Henderson. I'm the co-chair of INEE's Teachers in Crisis Context Collaborative, and also based at Teachers College, Columbia University. A big part of this event series is the collection of case studies representing promising practices in teacher wellbeing, professional development, teacher management, and school leadership. And today, with our focus on wellbeing, we're able to bring to you some fantastic friends and colleagues from different parts of the world that have focused in on teacher wellbeing in their own work. And so what we're going to do in this moderated conversation today is first hear from our colleagues Suha Tatunji, Fernanda Suarez, and Lindsay Brown, and they'll talk briefly about the work they're doing in their respective contexts. And following these brief presentations, we'll open up a discussion with some guiding questions to talk about what teacher wellbeing means in their specific contexts. And depending on where the conversation goes, feel free to add your own questions into the chat box, and we'll keep an eye on those. But I'll also pick up on some key issues that are being raised by our presenters, and that were also raised just now by Aguero in his very, very articulate and compelling presentation. So Suha, if I can ask you to come off mute, and we'll start with learning a little bit more about your work in Lebanon. And it's great to have you here.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, everyone. I was listening to Aguero, and I was saying, I bet, if the teachers at JSU were listening to us, they would be nodding their heads and saying, we hear you, we know what you're going through. So as Danny said, when we talk about challenges that the teachers are facing in their well-being, we have to take also into consideration the context, the culture, and where they are working. And the reason why I chose this slide is just to focus that, right, we always, when we talk about teachers' well-being, we think about their psychosocial, emotional well-being. We forget about the other side, the other aspect of their lives, like, for example, giving them freedom in their classrooms to go around teaching the curriculum the way they want to teach it, using the tools that they see fit for the students, instead of giving them a curriculum and saying, all right, here's the curriculum, go ahead, just do what it tells you to do. But freedom and being the masters of their classrooms is very important to have their well-being also taken care of, other than, of course, psychosocial well-being, because that's on another level as well. Also, we try as much as possible to provide them with learning communities so that they sit together and discuss without the presence of any of the principals or of the supervisors, so that also, again, we go back to the word freedom, so that they have the freedom to talk with each other and find solutions together for problems that they are probably, most of them, facing more or less the same challenges in the classrooms. And then once this is done, we need to listen to them. This is also a very important part of what we have to do. Listen to their queries, listen to what they're going through, listen to what's really obstacles they're facing in the classrooms, and try to find solutions. Because if we listen and then that's it, that's the end of it, then it's as if we've done nothing. So it's very important to follow up on when we listen to the teachers to see how is it that we can help them. For example, in our cases, some of the teachers were asking for more professional development on dealing with different levels in the classroom. So this is what we do. We try to arrange this for them, so they feel that, right, the organization is listening to us and they're doing something about it. And this is a very important part. Also, we also work on team building with the teachers. Professional development, fine. On academics, on management, on curriculum, on pedagogy is fine. But also team building activities are important. And in the slide, you can see we took the teachers out to, like a small place in the mountains in Lebanon under the pine leaves. And we had all lunch together, barbecued. And then we broke them, put them into groups, and they played together. They really enjoyed it. And they felt full of energy when they went back the following week to school, ready, for these challenges. So you really need to take all these into consideration, on top of course, the psychosocial, emotional well-being, because they are refugees themselves. So we tend to forget that when they're walking into the classroom, they have to, stand there, look happy, and that nothing's wrong. This is normal. We have normal lives. And yet they themselves are passing through some difficult moments.
Thank you so much, Suha, and for sharing the incredible work that Jusor does in Lebanon. And key messages I got out of that we'll come back to in the conversation are around organizations listening to teachers, and for teachers having the agency or freedom to choose what works best in their classrooms. So that was fantastic. And next, I want to welcome Fernando Suarez. So if you can come off mute, and we'll listen to you.
Thanks, Chris, and good morning, everyone. So I will share with you today some key learnings from a mixed method study we conducted in El Salvador to understand the impact of an in-service teacher professional development intervention on teacher social and emotional competencies and well-being. And I will share these learnings with you today by telling you the story of Carmen. Carmen is a math teacher in a secondary education school in El Salvador. Carmen takes a lot of pride in her profession and her contributions to the lives of students through her teaching. However, she also faces many challenges as a teacher working in a conflict-affected context. Carmen works morning and afternoon shifts, which leaves little time for her lesson planning. She often feels apprehensive in her commute to the school, given insecurity levels and gang-related violence in the surrounding community. She has suffered threats in the past from students who are gang members, and she often feels afraid to discipline students who are related to gangs or who are gang members themselves. In Carmen's own words, The relationship that some students may have with madres generates insecurity because it can put one's family or oneself at risk. Sometimes in recent years, this has stressed me a little. In 2017, Carmen received an invitation from the Ministry of Education to participate in a number of professional development workshops and training events focused on math subject content knowledge, on pedagogical practices, and to her surprise, on teacher social emotional competencies and well-being. She was very excited about the opportunity to improve her teaching and to focus on herself, and she quickly registered. Carmen really enjoyed all the trainings, but she especially liked the social emotional learning workshop series and perceived several benefits arising from her participation. She learned mindfulness techniques, and she incorporated mindfulness techniques as part of her daily life. As Carmen explained, when I feel too stressed, what I do is take a breath. I start to breathe. I take time to be able to do these breaths, and that helps me personally. However, as Carmen started attending the different workshops and trainings, she started feeling overwhelmed as she had to juggle her regular teaching obligations and reporting requirements to the Ministry of Education with attendance in these events. Some trainings took place during the week, which meant she had to leave her students unattended and fell behind in the program she had originally planned. At some point, she started feeling exhausted from being involved in too many professional development activities and stressed from falling behind in the curriculum implementation. Carmen, who's a real teacher, anecdotally captures the findings from our mixed method evaluation of this in-service teacher professional development intervention in El Salvador. Our quantitative results showed no statistically significant differences between teachers in the treatment group who were receiving the in-service professional development intervention and teachers in the control group on most measures of well-being that we analyzed, including mindfulness, emotion regulation, classroom management self-efficacy, emotion exhaustion, and stress. Our qualitative results, on the other hand, showed improved control and awareness of one's own emotions, application of mindfulness techniques to manage stress on a daily basis, and somewhat of mixed results on stress and emotional exhaustion. We have interpreted these results in two ways. First, we think that the change in mindfulness and awareness of emotions captured through the qualitative approach could potentially have happened more at the surface level and were potentially not strong enough to be captured by our measurement instruments and to have an effect on decreasing stress and emotional exhaustion levels. Second, and perhaps most importantly, the involvement in too many professional development activities could be having a negative influence in the level of teachers' stress and emotional exhaustion. There are a couple key reflections that I think emerge from this study that I'd like for us to think about today. First, our findings point to the need for thoughtful and purposeful consideration on how we deliver in-service teacher professional development in crisis-affected settings and how the delivery mode may influence teachers' stress and teachers' emotional exhaustion. We really do need to consider how we can better involve teachers in our programming to make our teacher professional development more relevant, more contextually appropriate, and at the very minimum, not to be adding an additional source of stress to the teachers. Second, I think we also need to think carefully about how we design, specifically like social emotional learning and well-being interventions, both in terms of the dosage as well as in terms of the delivery mode. In El Salvador specifically, we implemented 8 workshops, which were spread out through 1 year and delivered through a cascade approach. Then I think the question really becomes, is this dosage really sufficient to make a meaningful and significant change in teachers' mindfulness and emotional regulation strategies that could potentially lead to lower levels of stress and emotional exhaustion? So I'd like to leave those couple reflections today. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to our discussion, and I'm also happy to provide more information about the measures we used as well as about our research design.
Thank you so much, Fernanda. And for any of you who are keen on reading more about that fantastic case study, I've put in the chat box there a link to the document, to the publication in which we published that case study. And next, but not least, we have Lindsay Brown from NYU Global Ties. So welcome, Lindsay.
Hi, thank you. So I'm going to talk today somewhat quickly about how we sort of came to the point where most of you probably already are because you are attending here today. We came to sort of focus more on teachers and teacher well-being through a program called Learn Safe in Bow with the International Rescue Committee. And this was a multi-component intervention, but I'm going to focus today on the social emotional learning aspect. And this was aimed at students. Students were coming off of the crisis of Ebola in Sierra Leone, and so we were looking at helping them sort of address some of those social emotional issues by training teachers to implement 2 social emotional learning activities. One called Brain Games, which is with Stephanie Jones out of Harvard, and it focuses on executive functioning skills like working memory and attention and inhibition. And the second one is our mindfulness activities, which are probably what you think they are. They focus on mind-body awareness and stress reduction in students. Both activities were short. They were about 10 minutes, and they were implemented twice per day, once in the morning and once after lunch. Next slide, please. Just a little bit about the teacher context in Sierra Leone. This is going to sort of amplify and exemplify some of what Danny was saying earlier in her conceptual framework about how the context affects teacher well-being, and I'm sure it's going to echo a lot of what's happening in places where you all work. So after the Civil War, there was a really rapid increase in enrollment. Free primary was promised to people, but this led, there really weren't sufficient government funds to support that, both in terms of schools and materials, and also in terms of salaries of teachers. And this led to an insufficient number of teachers. And so it goes also to the ratio of children to teachers is huge, but also in our study, what we were finding was that there were a lot of community teachers, which means that those teachers were untrained members of the community who were asked to become classroom teachers because there weren't enough teachers to teach the children in the classrooms. And so this was causing a large amount of stress on sort of everyone in the school community. So school directors were saying, this is so challenging for me. I have to figure out how to support these teachers. Peer teachers were saying, you know, if the community teacher needs to work on their farm and they can't show up today, we have to figure out how to address their class. The community teachers were saying, you know, I'm doing my best, but I just don't have, there's not enough of me to go around, essentially. So this is a little bit of the context in which our teachers were living and what we were hearing in our study from our teachers. And when we went to ask the teachers, because this was an implementation study, how are these social emotional learning activities going with your students? What we were hearing from teachers is that they were using them to address their own stress. So the first quote on the left is from a coach, and he said, the thing I like most about these brain games, actually, it reduces the stress of the teacher and also the children. Because if you bring up an activity, you will not just go and say, hey, stand up and go do freeze for me. Freeze is one of the games. You will join them. So by doing that, even if you are stressed, that stress will go. So that is what I like about brain games. And then the quote on the right is from a teacher. I do one mindfulness game, like I shake everything off with myself at home. Perhaps I am hot-tempered or I am stressed and have heard news that made me so stressed that I will stand up and do shake everything off. And shake everything off is literally an activity where you envision your stress and you shake it out of your body. That's one of the mindfulness activities. So what we were hearing from teachers is that these activities were useful not just for the students, but for them. And it made us reflect on how we really had not focused sufficiently on teachers for their own well-being, and also for how they can assist students in their social emotional well-being. Because of course, if you have a teacher who's implementing mindfulness, but so stressed that they're yelling at the students, that's probably not going to be helpful. And it has really informed our future work, both a project with War Child Holland around teacher well-being with a program called CORE, and also a program that I'm leading with teacher professional development called Better. And that's all I'm going to say for now. Happy to talk more about all of this in the Q&A.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Lindsay. And just a reminder to our audience that you can post questions in the chat box, and we'll do our best to address those questions in the conversation as well. And just on the subject of audience, it's amazing to see so many familiar names in our audience list and new names too. And we can see there's a lot of you attending today who have got great experience in this sector as well. And so during this conversation, we will put a link in the chat box for where, if you're feeling inspired to submit a case study documenting promising practice in your own context, then by all means do. We would love to hear from you. And so we'll put a link in the chat box as to where you can submit a case study too, because we do want to share this promising practice and spread all these insights and important learnings to the many places we work. But if I can ask Lindsay, Fernanda, and Suha to come off, or come on camera, I should say, and come off mute, we can start the conversation. And as I said earlier, we might go off script a little bit, and I'm going to start by going off script. So my apologies in advance for putting you on the spot. But how important do you think it is for donors and for policymakers to not only hear the voice of teachers, but to know who these teachers are? So we've seen Aguero, Fernanda, you talked about Carmen, and we've seen images of the teachers working and doing such important work in these schools. So why is it so important to learn who these teachers are and hear their voices from your perspective?
I can try to go first, Chris. I think it all starts with that, right? It starts with understanding like what's teachers' understanding, definition, and experiences of well-being in different contexts, as well as within the same context. Because within the same context, teachers with different characteristics might experience and might define well-being in a different way. And I think perhaps we haven't really thought enough about how do we conceptualize, understand, and define well-being, both in terms of like a common definition as well as in this locally grounded understanding. And I think to me, it all starts with that. You need to have this well-defined in order to be able to design or co-design with teachers specific interventions that will be able to directly respond to their well-being needs. You need that in order to be able to develop measurement tools, because you first need to know what is well-being and what do you want to measure before you start developing measurement tools. And finally, in order to build the evidence base on what works to promote teachers' well-being in crisis and conflict settings. So I think, just to go back, I think it all starts with listening to the teachers to understand how they define well-being, how do they understand, how do they experience well-being, and how can we together with them co-create, co-design interventions that will directly be able to have an effect on supporting them and improving their well-being levels.
And Suha or Lindsay?
Oh yeah, so I think I'm seeing something that's concerning, and it's not new, but I think teachers are being sidestepped in education in general, and especially in emergency contexts, that there's this idea that we can replace them with tablets, or they're sort of getting in the way of the students' intrinsic motivation to learn. And for me personally, I think we've forgotten the transformative potential of teachers. And I want to take your question a step further and say that not only should we be seeing donors, should we have the donors be seeing teachers in action? I think have them visit classrooms and talk to teachers, but also, like Fernanda was saying, we should be asking them to fund the kind of research practice partnerships where teachers are really involved in these training programs, in designing the intervention, and having a real voice in both what the intervention looks like, but also in carrying it forward once that funding from the donors expires, and in having a real stake in their ownership. And I think that could be really transformative as well.
Yeah, thank you. I would like to also, again, stress on what Lindsay was saying on donors, because I mean, it's very important for donors to put themselves in the teacher's place and really listen to them, because when donations come in, they say, fine, we will donate money for a school, but not for salaries, for example. And not compensating the teachers is I know it's maybe why you're looking at that when you have emergency settings and people don't have enough food on their tables, but teachers also need to feed themselves and they need to feed their families. Especially in our case, for example, most of the teachers, the female teachers, I may also insist on this word, are the main breadwinners. So if they don't have a well-deserved compensation, then they can't feed their family. And they will be thinking of that, and of course, which will affect their well-being, and eventually the well-being of their students. So policymakers, donors should really listen to teachers. So I would like to also add to what Lindsay and Fernanda were saying.
Yeah, no, and I would like to also second that as well, because I think oftentimes, unfortunately, the interventions that we do on teacher well-being is driven by the donor's agenda. But I would say like another challenge that we face related to that is that as implementers, I work for an implementing organization, we need to balance this need for contextualized understanding of well-being and contextually relevant interventions with this tight funding timelines and pressures from donors to quickly implement.
And so if I can build off all of your points, and Suha, maybe your point specifically, we're talking about without those basic compensation and those basic conditions being met, many of our efforts to improve well-being through specific strategies, even if they are culturally and contextually responsive, might be somewhat ineffective. So how, from all of your perspectives, how can we frame this idea of well-being as being deeply connected to issues of compensation, certification, and better work conditions too?
It's a good question and very difficult to answer as well, because I mean, the people up there, the policymakers, the governments, they don't see this. They see, I mean, sadly, they see it as a phase that will pass and that's it. But they don't realize it's now been like 10 years since the Syrian crisis, and Lebanon for our civil war, 17 years, I'm sorry. And in some cases, even longer and longer. Third generations have been born in camps or in the refugee context. And if we do not pour our education into these children through the teachers, what will happen to them? There's no future for them. And so this is a very difficult one, because politics come in, and this is I mean, we should isolate. Politics have nothing to do with the children and their future and their well-being and all that. So teachers are the ones who are passing this on to the students. So teachers should be prioritized.
And I think it's also maybe important to start generating this evidence base in terms of like what factors impact teacher well-being, like compensation, for example, as Suha was mentioning, potentially being like a big one of them. And then like, how can we support teachers in using that evidence base to advocate for policies and reforms that attend to their own well-being?
I think the compensation issue is so challenging, and so what we were seeing in Sierra Leone, and again, I'm sure it's true in other contexts, is that the consequences of of either no compensation for some teachers or very meager sort of in-kind compensation, and even the teachers who were on government payroll mostly were not receiving the amount of compensation they were intended to receive. It had really far-reaching effects for the whole system in terms of creating a lot of teacher absenteeism, because people have to feed their families. And so if their job isn't paying them, they have to, be on their farm working, or, be at the market on market day. And so I think one of the things that we need to amplify is that some of the things that we blame on teachers in the system, like, well, teachers don't show up, but we're not looking at the root causes of why that is in a lot of these contexts, and being able to make the connections between pay and these other issues within the system, I think is helpful in terms of increasing the functioning of the system as a whole. I guess I didn't quite connect that to well-being, but they feel so intrinsically connected to me. But yeah.
Yeah, and an issue that's coming up, and when our colleague Samaya Mansour presents some of the findings from the gap analysis, this is one of the key findings. In April, our colleague has just noted this in the chat box as well, that teacher well-being is an end unto itself. So often we talk about the need for teacher well-being as a means of serving student well-being. And Lindsay, as your presentation so wonderfully pointed out, that teachers do benefit from those initiatives too. But again, how do we shift this focus on well-being for teachers, because they too are humans, they are professionals in these contexts that deserve our full attention and effort as well? How do we shift that narrative? It's another huge question, I'm sorry, but
yeah, it is. I really think that people who are working on the policies or on the compensation issues, like in Lebanon, for example, they haven't paid the teachers. It's been a year since they've paid them their last salaries, and the inflation rate and the dollar soaring and the lira dropping drastically. It's the second biggest economic crisis in the world in 200 years that we're facing in Lebanon. And so it would be really nice to get these people to sit in the classroom and try it themselves and see how difficult and challenging it is before they start judging and saying, but if a teacher misses a day of school, we will deduct from her salary. Or if a teacher has to go to work on their residency papers because refugees have to do that at the security, then we'll deduct a day of their salaries. And this is shameful. This is really shameful. I think the best way to do it is put them there in the classrooms and let them really feel what the teachers are going through and how they go about their day, and prioritizing them. And not just seeing them like, oh, anyone can go in the classroom and give a class, and that's it.
I think it's very challenging to argue for teacher well-being as an end into itself, although I believe that it is and should be, because I think part of what donors want to hear, everyone wants to hear, is that you're solving 10 problems at once. And so you're trying to link the problem that you're trying to solve to all of its downstream benefits. And so you're saying, so your argument is around, well, not only are we helping teachers, but we're doing all of these other things by helping teachers. But I think one thing to think about is that for so many teachers, it is a real calling, and certainly people are not there for the pay, and to think about a profession where we know that people are there to serve others. I think just we should want to support that within our society. I'm still mentally going to the good of the society, but for for them.
And if I can go to a final question, and I'm going to try and be clever here, and it might not pay off, but I'm going to try and blend two questions into one, because we've got a question in the chat box here from Asel, who's asked, what do we think about teachers' autonomy? Perhaps that's also an idea around teachers' agency and their role in developing curriculum during crisis periods. And the second part of that question, which is where I'm trying to be clever, is all of you have mentioned the importance of cultural contextualisation around wellbeing strategies. And so to you, what does this mean to contextualise a wellbeing strategy to respond to the cultural context in which we work? And maybe if you can talk to this idea of teacher autonomy, teacher agency as part of wellbeing as well, that'd be amazing.
So I think the way I see teacher well-being really is like a multidimensional phenomenon, right? That encompasses many different elements that can be physical, motivational, cognitive, social, and emotional. So I think like this contextualization to me, it's like, okay, like understanding with the teachers what for these teachers means to be well in this context, in the context that they live, which could be different things, as we said, like across context or within the same context. And I think with that understanding, it becomes the next question is, okay, so like what factors enable or inhibit these teachers to, like develop and be well in the way that they define wellness. So I think thinking about like with them, like the types of interventions that can tackle those barriers and that they can promote those facilitators to their well-being. So I think to me, it's kind of like a sequence and a channel that again always starts, okay, what does it mean to be well for you? Where do you live? And then from that, you can start to kind of like trickle down on those other factors.
Yeah, I mean, sorry.
Yeah. Sorry, Chris. To answer the question of the teachers working on the curriculum, definitely. This is part of what I was saying about freedom, giving the teachers the freedom to do it. With guidance, of course. It's not going to just throw them into there and go and build your own curriculum, but with some guidance. And I think that they should, because I mean, especially if they are from the same culture, they know exactly, talking about the cultural background and the cultural well-being, if we can call it so, taking those into consideration. So why not, if teachers, most of the teachers, for example, some of the teachers, female teachers, they feel intimidated having male, for example, colleagues, why not have an all-female school, for example? So this is also something that should be, I mean, why should it be a hindrance for teachers to excel and for them to be relaxed in their classroom while they're teaching? These cultural differences are important. Sometimes the West, looks at it as an obstacle. But life is integrated, fine. But it shouldn't be the reason to be an obstacle towards the teacher's well-being. So we have to work around them. And again, I always say this, freedom for the teachers to also take command of their own well-being and seek help or ask maybe the donors, maybe the organization they work for that help, that we cannot decide that, oh yeah, well now they need a session on mindfulness. Maybe they don't. Listen to what they have to say and move towards them, not them move towards you.
Well, on that very powerful and very appropriate final point, I want to draw everyone, well, first, I want to thank each of you for participating in this conversation today. It's been incredible and so valuable to get your insights. And to sort of echo the points all of you have made so clearly, I want to quickly invite our colleague Charlotte to present the INEE TiCC call to action, which is a core function of this event series, is to really amplify and raise awareness of this call to action. But thanks once again to each of you for your conversation today. It's been wonderful to have you as part of this.
Chris, I was wondering which Charlotte there, but happy to jump in. And Jay, I think there's a slide just to let, as we said at the beginning, that this is part of a wider event series and wider effort to try and develop a transformational agenda. From reading the chat, listening to the powerful speakers there, I think there's a recognition that we really need to move the needle and work together as a sector to do more and better for teachers. And so these different partners are coming together to develop a call to action, which we will hope will set out what needs to change and how it can change. We have sort of initial framing that you can see here that includes calls to prioritise teachers, respect teachers, enable teachers, support teachers' wellbeing, as we're discussing today, and listen to teachers' expertise, experiences and opinions. There'll be, throughout the event series, there will be opportunities for you to feed into this call to action and to shape this agenda. So I'm going to put in the chat more information about the event series, which will include sessions like this one where we discuss core themes and topics, so that you're able to find out more and get involved, because I know we've got lots of brilliant colleagues on the webinar today, and we'd love to hear from you and hear your perspectives. But I'll perhaps leave it there, as I know we have another speaker to go. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Char. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today and for being part of this very important and urgent conversation. I'll be talking about the work INEE has been doing to support teacher well-being very quickly and very briefly. So we just published a report on teacher well-being. It's a gap analysis and a resource mapping report. So we worked on collecting and disseminating teaching and learning resources, and we mapped the resources against the teacher well-being framework Danny spoke about earlier. And we also identified some gaps in the teaching and learning materials we found. We did that through online searches. We also sent out calls for resources that were unavailable online, but were very key to our understanding of the availability and the type of resources that are out there. We conducted a number of key informant interviews, and I was lucky to speak with Suha, and we learned a lot from her experience in Lebanon. And we also developed a teacher questionnaire to include teacher voices in the report and to understand their needs, their challenges, and their lived realities. We then analyzed our data from the 3 different data sources, and we used a matrix that builds on the landscape review and the socio-ecological framework. We now have 130 available materials on the INEE website, and my colleague will post the link to the matrix shortly in the chat box, and they're available for all stakeholders to kind of use to support teacher well-being. And these resources, they're either self-directed resources or facilitated resources. There are also a number of policy documents and advocacy documents that kind of elevate the need to support teacher well-being in crisis context. And we also have the full report available online. It has the full 10 findings and the 13 recommendations we put out there. For this call, we prioritized the 5 findings that speak to many of the issues we've been talking about this morning. We found that the resources, the majority of the resources actually, they treat teacher well-being as a means to an end, and this has been mentioned by most of the speakers today. And the resources were actually very much exclusive of teacher voices. So teachers were not involved in the creation of the materials. We noticed that there are no contextualization or adaptation guides in the materials. And the policy documents that actually targeted pay lacked mention of wider compensation, Suha spoke about, and there are no pathways for teachers to engage in policy dialogue. So there were no opportunities that were laid out on how teachers can be involved in the conversations that actually eventually inform policy and program design as well. So we recommend that we position teachers as central to our efforts to support them and through programs, policies, and initiatives. And we have to involve them in the design and the development of the resources themselves, and focus on contextualization, include adaptation and contextualization guides that help different stakeholders adapt the resources to fit the needs and the challenges of teachers. And also think about the wider compensation needs of teachers, include perhaps allowances, support for like housing and whatnot. And there was also a need to standardize these policies across different actors and empower teachers to become part of the policy dialogues and to inform changes that will eventually support them better. And after we finished and published the report, we conducted several workshops with different stakeholders, and we gathered their insights and their understandings to start working on a guidance note along 3 main pillars. One of them is mental health and psychosocial support. Another one is providing enabling learning spaces and environments. And the third is teacher agency, which is key to well-being, as was mentioned by several speakers this morning. So please watch this space, and I will reiterate my colleague Chris's invitation for you to send us any case studies, programs, and initiatives you think might help us in the guidance note, and to just share best practices with stakeholders. Thank you.
Thanks, Samaya. Thanks a lot. And thanks a lot to all our speakers today who accepted to share their really inspiring experiences with us. You have all raised such important points, and we could go on for hours discussing this. Today's discussion was a vital reminder that quality and inclusive education for all crisis-affected students can never be achieved without systematically improving support for teachers and ensuring that they are supported in the way that is the most helpful for them in their specific context, as it was very right highlighted by Fernanda. The interview with Aguero, whom you heard explain the condition in which he works in Kakuma refugee camps, were very similar to the condition in a lot of other refugee camps across the world, was particularly illustrative. And it is clear that we need to do more and better to listen to what teachers have to say, what they need in the classroom are, so that they can give their best to their students. Finally, as mentioned by Chris, we will soon be publishing a new edition of Promising Practice in Teacher Management, Professional Development and Wellbeing, and we would love to hear from you and elevate teachers' voices from your context. So if you would like to submit a case study, you will find all the information on the links shared in the chat box. Thank you again for your participation today, and please keep up to date with the upcoming events by consulting the dedicated event series page in the INEE website. Thanks to all of you, and have a good end of your day.